So, time then for Saturday night's press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's papers. And this evening, we'll see what's making the headlines with Christina Patterson, journalist and author, who is joined by Wallis, editor at the Jewish Chronicle. A very good evening to both of you. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at those front pages. Let's begin with the Sunday Telegraph, shall we? The Chief of Defence Staff has said Army staff are not spare capacity for striking staff. That's on the front page. The Express reports the Home Secretary has vowed to end migrant deaths by tackling criminal gangs. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex want to sit down with the royal family to discuss their grievances after the release of their Netflix documentary. That's on the front of the Sunday Times. Similarly, the Sun also reports on Harry and Meghan's demands, while the Star on Sunday has a story about the late pop singer George Michael. And don't forget, by scanning the QR code you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of Sunday's papers while you listen and watch us discussing them. And we're joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Wallis. Great to see you both. Let's start, shall we, with the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Interesting angle this, Christina, isn't it? We know that the armed forces are going to be brought in. It's part of the government's contingency planning to help out during these strikes, doing things like driving ambulances. But the Chief of Defence Staff is saying that it is perilous, that's his word, to expect personnel to be used routinely for that role.
Absolutely, and I think I'm really pleased you've spoken out. It's Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, who has said that the armed forces are not spare capacity. And I think that is how they are often used, or they are being used in this situation by the government. And we should remember that most people in the armed forces earn considerably less than most people in the public sector and have had much lower pay rises than most people in the public sector. They are not allowed to strike, and they are being forced, because you have to do what you're told in the armed forces, more than in most jobs, to cover for people who are striking, and will therefore, some of them miss Christmas, missing their families. So it's a tough ask. And it's also an ask that seems to suggest that there's masses of spare capacity and people just sitting around doing nothing. Well, they are already doing jobs and they can't step in to become paramedics. I mean, they may be able to drive a vehicle, but that is not the same as being a paramedic. It's not the same as being a member of the border forces, and it's certainly not the same as being a nurse or somebody working in A&E. So I think he's quite right to point this out. And I think that the government uses, they always talk about the military when they want to sound macho and tough. What they should be doing is sitting down and negotiating, and not pretending that the pay review body is an independent body, because it was working to the government's brief, and what it has suggested is within the boundaries that the government has given it. So quite right too is what I would say.
Yeah, we'll broaden it out in a second, but just get your thoughts, Jake, on this story in the Telegraph. Just looking at the figures, the standard wage for a soldier is £21,424. For a paramedic, £27,055. As Christina says, it will be a tough ask for some of those soldiers.
That's right. I mean, those two figures that you quoted were the lowest figures. Yeah. So for a private in the army, 21,000, and then for a paramedic after, I think it was 2 years experience, 27. The average nurse's pay is £37,000. The average pay in Britain is £34,000. So they're being paid slightly above the average. And I just feel overall that my patience is running out with the nurses' strike. And I think I probably speak for a lot of people in Britain. I mean, myself, my fiance had a problem with her chest the other day. And she went to the doctor. Doctor couldn't tell whether it was a clot or a collapsing lung, but she couldn't get an x-ray, which she needed because the nurses were on strike. I think these experiences are being replicated up and down the country, and people are going to begin to become rather cross. And this is another dimension to the story, whereby the soldiers are being told to come in and pick up the slack. Of course, as Christina pointed out, they're not fully trained to do so. You can't magically turn a soldier into a nurse or into a firefighter or into a paramedic or whatever. So they're not really equipped to do so. And they've got a job of their own. We have an army for a reason. We don't have nurses to fight wars. We don't have soldiers to do nursing. And it does seem to me as if, soldiers are not legally allowed to strike because their job is so important to the security of the nation that they have to do their jobs, whatever. And I'm beginning to feel that the same should really apply to nurses whose jobs are no less vital to the health, functioning and security of our country.
Yeah, it's a debate that is being had, isn't it, Christina, at the moment, that nurses perhaps shouldn't be allowed to strike. Where do you stand on that?
Well, my heart goes out to you, Jake, and your fiancé, because that is an absolutely dreadful situation if you can't get the help you need. And of course, many people did have their appointments cancelled and they missed out on getting treatment they really needed. And the fact that it has the word routine in front of it doesn't mean it's important and won't make a difference to your life that you don't get it. But I have to say that at the moment, according to the latest poll, 60% of the country do support the nurses, and the support from the nurses has actually gone up 2 percentage points. So as a country, our patience for the nurses is not waning. And generally speaking, nurses are not well paid for the work they do. And in real terms, since 2010, they've actually had a significant pay cut. So I absolutely do support them. And I think they are doing this very, very reluctantly. And they have taken measures to ensure that, basic life-saving treatment is given to people. But of course, people do suffer, and presumably some people will die as a result of this strike, which is tragic. And I do think that they do have the right to strike. They have the right to withdraw their labour, and most of them are doing it because their working conditions, there are so many vacancies unfilled in nursing that their working life has become next to impossible.
And Christina, sorry to interrupt, but when Rishi Sunak, as he says in The Sun tomorrow, all massive pay hikes would do is kick us into an inflation spiral and we'd all be worse off, what do you say to that?
Well, I think there is room for negotiation with the nurses. I think it was probably not very wise of them to go in asking for 19% when inflation is around 10%, because that does look unreasonable. But then the 4%-ish they've been offered also looks unreasonable. And I think there has to be some middle ground. And in fact, I think probably we will end up with some kind of middle ground. I think there is talk afoot of talks now, because I think the government realise that if they're up against the nurses, they are actually going to, that in terms of public support, the government is unlikely to win on this one. I think there are different feelings about different people. For example, the transport union striking, I think there are different levels of sympathy there. But for nurses currently, I think the level of sympathy is high, and I think they have to reach some kind of settlement.
OK, and just finally on this, let's bring in the front page of the Observer, I think, if we can. Nurses pledge tougher new strikes as NHS crisis deepens. This is also an issue, Jake, isn't it? That if both sides don't sit round the table, it could get even worse as we head further into winter.
That's right. I don't want to in any way suggest that I don't have sympathy for nurses who do an extraordinarily difficult job under very challenging circumstances, which are only more difficult since the pandemic than they were before. But, soldiers do a difficult job too. A lot of people do a difficult job out of public service, out of a sense of vocation. And what nurses need to do is begin to think about the implications on patients. It's their duty to serve patients, just as it's soldiers' duty to serve our country. And Christina did say that public support stands at about 60% right now. It was a few weeks ago at 80% when the strikes were first mooted. So it is waning. Obviously, it fluctuates. But I think that what we really need to remember is that, my fiance's experience is one of millions around the country. People are really suffering from a bad service at the NHS, and they have been since the pandemic. Waiting lists longer than they've been in living memory, pretty much. Ambulances, overburdened. The A&E departments spilling out into the streets. Things are bad in the NHS, and to choose this moment to strike, however difficult your job is as a nurse, I think is the wrong thing to do.
OK, let's go for a change of topic. Front of the Sunday Times, also on the front of the Sun on Sunday as well. Harry and Meghan, Christina, are after a royal summit, a bit like the one that Ngozi Fulani and Lady Hussey had this week, where they sat down and discussed their grievances, and actually, by all accounts, everything seemed to go quite well. Now Harry and Meghan want an apology from the palace.
I'm sorry to laugh, but look, I've seen the first 3 episodes of the Netflix series. I have not sat down to watch the other three. I had the excuse of having COVID for the first one, and I don't have COVID now, and life is frankly too short. But I just think the level of kind of lack of self-knowledge is pretty breathtaking. I'm sure they feel they have enormous grievances. Well, they clearly feel they have enormous grievances. The entire world now knows how deep those grievances are. I think to wash your dirty linen in public the way they have done and make huge amounts of money out of it and then claim you are the wronged parties, that really is not the way to go. If you genuinely want to solve a family sort of, problem of some kind, then you talk to people. You don't bitch about them or diss them in public. You don't make vast amounts of money out of them. You don't make allegations that those people don't feel able to respond to, because traditionally the royal family does not respond to those kinds of things. The royal family is a very, very weird institution. It's very anachronistic. It must be very difficult to be in it. I think, you do grow up in a gilded cage. I have full sympathy for anyone born into the royal family and exposed to that level of public scrutiny. But really, the time comes when you think, enough already. Can you perhaps stop the complaining? I mean, make your choice. Make your choice. If you want to be free of the royal family, drop the titles, be in your 16-bathroom mansion, and just, get a job and stop dissing every single person who, once loved you, because really it's not a very attractive spectacle.
I didn't know they had 16 bathrooms. That's something I've learned tonight. Jake?
16 bathrooms. I mean, yeah. I mean, what can you do with 16 bathrooms? I mean, it's the most undignified and unedifying spectacle. I mean, for any family to air its dirty laundry in public like this is really ugly and ill-advised, and makes reconciliation much more difficult, let alone the royal family, and let alone when it's done via Netflix. I mean, it's the most extraordinary sort of story that's unraveling before our eyes. And I think that for Harry and Meghan to now demand a summit and to demand an apology from the royal family is to use a Yiddish word about the peak of chutzpah. I don't think anybody in the country would really think that they would either deserve an apology or stand a good chance of getting this summit that they seem to desire. And to draw a parallel between the meeting between Susan Hussey and Ngozi Fulani and their situation just shows such a level of myopia. It really does seem they've disappeared up their own egos.
OK, we've just got a minute or so to discuss the final story. It's on the front of the Sunday Express. I was down in Dover this week for that awful story about 4 people drowning in the Channel, Christina. Clearly something does need to be done to stop further tragedies like that. What's the Home Secretary saying?
Well, the Home Secretary is saying, as always, that she is going to be the person to solve this, and good luck to her. I mean, it certainly needs solving, because this constant flow of people risking their lives and losing their lives, it really is tragic. And at the moment, an awful lot of them are not have no claim to be in the UK. Many of them have been coming from Albania, which is a safe country, and they have no reason to be claiming asylum or be housed at the expense of the British taxpayer. But there are other people who are escaping terrible situations. But the fact that, many people in the world are in terrible situations, and it's currently only the ones who pay the smugglers who managed to get to the UK. So it is a dreadful situation, but Suella Braverman is very, very good on the rhetoric, not so good with her personal emails, and, very bad at solving the problem. So let's see how far she gets. But I think less talk and more action would probably be appreciated.
OK, we'll perhaps get your thoughts on that in the next hour. Jake, we must leave you there for the moment. Time to go to a break. Coming up, this picture on the front page of the Sunday Times of Gareth Southgate, and the story about why the England manager's staying put. Welcome back. Part 2 of the press preview. Jake and Christina still here. And let's talk about this story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, Jake. First time cocaine and cannabis users will avoid prosecution. Police drawing up new plans?
That's right. This is placing the police and public health professionals on a collision course with the government, because the Home Secretary's policy is to ramp up the level of punishment meted out to people who not just supply drugs but take them as well, with the aim to deter the use of drugs. But public health professionals have pointed out that doesn't really work. A more effective strategy is to treat, light users, first-time users, and so forth, as a public health matter, to divert them into schemes that educate them and provide routes out of drug use, and thus save police time. To me, it seems like a very practical solution and a good one. The police are stretched enough as it is, trying to keep on top of burglaries and other types of low-level crime. It does seem like a good idea to take a pragmatic approach to reducing drug use, whatever way you can. And it seems like if it works, I think it should be done.
But, this already happens, doesn't it, Christina? 14 police forces in England and Wales already operate a no prosecution strategy.
Yes, but the government, again, always, likes to show that it has had enough of the experts and prefers to wend its own sweet way because it thinks that by being anti-drugs and sounding tough on crime, they always think will make them sound very macho and tough, and they always think that's a vote winner. And it's a calculation that is made, particularly, it has to be said, towards, for example, red wall seats, because there is a sense that in more working class communities, ironically, in the communities where there are higher levels of crime, that being tough on crime in the way that they suggest, which always means, longer prison sentences, zero tolerance of this, that, and the other. Unfortunately, it never works. And if you really want to solve the problem of drugs or any number of very complicated societal issues, you should listen to the experts. And as Jake says, the public health evidence shows that actually the approach where you don't criminalise people for a first-time offence is much more effective, because then you lock people into the criminal justice system and it just perpetuates the whole thing.
Yeah, a Home Office spokesman said yesterday that drugs ruin lives and devastate communities, which is why the government is committed to tackling both the supply and demand for drugs. And let's finish with this news, front of the Sunday Times. Jake, I don't know if you've been following the World Cup in Qatar, but Gareth Southgate was sort of mulling things over about whether he was going to stay on, but he is now ready to tell the FA he will stay as head coach.
That's right. I mean, it seems no exaggeration to say that Gareth Southgate seems to think about leaving almost, every year at the very least. And this seems to be the latest bout of soul searching. He received a lot of abuse, apparently, recently online, I suppose, and has been questioning his position, but now seems like he's going to stay. I mean, look, the England performance at the World Cup in Qatar fizzled out. We had high hopes, which were sustained for a while, but then it was a case of same old England, the curse of the penalty back again. And unfortunately, England becoming true to form. We're still trying to break free of those years of hurt, and we're trying to bring football home. But it seems like Gareth Southgate still feels like he's the man to do it, and I think the country will be behind him on that. There's a lot of affection for him, despite the eventual fizzling out of our campaign in Qatar.
And I know, Christina, you've not been following events in Qatar that closely, but I think this will be a popular decision, won't it?
Well, as you know, Jonathan, I'm no great fan of football, but I'm a very big fan of Gareth Southgate. I think he's a lovely man. He has great integrity. He's very, very good at building team spirit. The members of the England football team really like him. The British public really like him. And I think he's a man, I think the reason he considers his position is because he knows how unpopular you are if you are an England coach and you don't lead your team to victory, which is, of course, the general state of things. And he wants to make sure that, people want him in the job, and people do want him in the job. So, good for Gareth. We look forward to him, I don't know, having a nice time. I really don't care, I'm afraid, whether England win anything. But,
well,
they're young lads. They're nice men. There are lovely young people on that team. And if it makes them happy to win, then I would love them to win.
I remember last time we were on, you were saying this exactly the same thing about Marcus Rashford. You said, I don't know much about football, but I know that Marcus Rashford is a very nice young man.
I love the characters. I have no interest in the game, Jonathan, but I think they're lovely characters. I mean, look at Marcus Rashford's campaigning work in charities and for school meals and all the rest of it. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful young person. And I think a number of them are very, very impressive people.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thank you both.